G'day YouTube, Warble's on a lot here. I was going to go all the way to my back boundary, but it's late in the day, and I'll be honest with you, I've already got myself pretty well bushed out there looking for the track that I couldn't find last time I was up here either. And that time I was on the electric motorbike, and I discovered all kinds of reasons why that's not much good when riding in vegetation that's higher than the rider's hat, because all of this long vegetation rubs up against the brake levers, and on an electric motorbike it automatically cuts power to the motor and you have to stop and move the vegetation. Anyway, that's not what I brought you here today to think about and talk about and listen to a bit of a monologue concerning. I want to talk about Australia's domestic violence norms. Now you can take that either way. It's either the normals who live in the burbs, or it's the normalised social behaviour among everybody who lives in Australia. And recently there's been quite the brouhaha in the media concerning the fact that there's somewhere between 1.5 and 2 women per week are dying at the hands of their male partner or their male ex-partner. That's come to be called domestic violence, and it grabs the headlines a lot. And the people who report it and the people who talk about it a lot, they seem to make much of the fact that 20 years ago it wasn't 1.5 people per week dying at the hands of their partner, 1.5 women per week dying at the hands of their partner. 20 years ago it was 1 to 1.5, not rather than 1.5 to 2. And 20 years before that, I can remember 40 odd years ago when I was a student nurse, people were worried that it was sort of 3/4, nearly 1 person per week. But I get the impression that 40 years ago there was nearly 1 person a week being killed by their ex-partner or their current partner. That's a woman being killed. And now there's nearly 2. We haven't got 100 per year, which would be 2 a week. We've definitely got 50 per year. We're somewhere in that range. And that's on the one hand. On the other hand, there's the fact that some people I've heard recently quoting statistics suggesting that same-sex attracted relationships have a higher interrelationship assault rate, battery rate, injury rate than heterosexual relationships. But it's the heterosexual relationships that make up the bulk of the relationships in the community. Therefore, their signal kind of swamps that of the same-sex relationship couples who are beating each other up and turning up either at the police station to complain or at the hospital to have the bruises treated. Now, I haven't seen those figures. I don't know where those figures came from. It might be true. I don't know. Back in the days when I had anything much to do with same-sex attracted people, it was when I was a student nurse at Concord Repat Hospital, and half the nursing staff was male and half the nursing staff was same-sex attracted. And there were some bisexuals who played both sides of the camp. But yeah, it just meant that half the blokes were same-sex attracted and half the women were same-sex attracted. In that there was, I think, 1,200 people on the staff, and there was 1 nurse's aide who had been employed as a male nurse's aide who was undergoing hormonal therapy and wanted to get into surgical therapy, and they wanted to start wearing a dress to work. And there was a big dispute over whether that could happen in the early 1980s, when the director of nursing was male and half the nursing staff were male and half the nursing staff were same-sex attracted. That was the big, leading edge bone of contention, was whether this one person could wear a dress to work. And they said no. So the person took to playing tennis in lunch breaks on the hospital tennis court out the back window of the nursing administration building. And because they were classed as a male nurse's aide, therefore they could take their top off with all the other males playing tennis. And that, of course, meant that the estrogen therapy and the breast buds that had been generated as a result thereof were bouncing around with no bra or top on. And nursing administration said, oh, no, we can't have this. Here's a plan. You resign from here and go and get a job, put female on the job application, wear a dress there, then resign there and come back here, show us proof that you got an employment history as a female, and yeah, that's going to be your thing. And that happened. It actually happened. And then the transsexual person started wearing a dress and announced that they were actually a lesbian the whole time. They just wanted to have relationships with women while being a woman. It was all very complicated, and that used to be very unusual. So I don't know what 40 years progress of such relationships coming out of whatever closets they might have been in or haven't been normalised, or increasing trends towards such things, what impact those changes may have made on the figures regarding domestic violence. But they may well have influenced things. But I got the impression as a little kid that everybody's parents were mild and well-mannered and well-behaved, and nobody ever raised their voice, let alone hit each other, except children. Like everybody was allowed to hit children. I was more kept in line with the thought of what would happen if my father got the stock whip that he'd shown me how he could cut an apple off a tree and then cut the apple on the ground into halves and cut the halves into quarters. And he promised me that if I ever took my pedal car out on the road again, he was going to put that horse whip, stock whip, cattle whip around my bum like he put it round the apple. Do you understand me, do you? Yes, Daddy. Yes, Daddy. Yes, Daddy. The teachers used to beat the children in the schools. I've been caned. I've been strapped. You go to high school back in the 70s, and there were, well, when the military did it, they were called bastardisation rituals. When I was at 2 different boarding schools, it sort of went on to a decreasing degree. Everybody was sort of slowly waking up themselves and doing a bit less of it than was done to them. Not everybody wanted to make sure that the next generation had to suffer just like they suffered. And I formed an opinion when I was maybe 11 or 12 and being beaten up by the people who were in second form, right? And it would be like the year 7 kids getting beaten up by the year 8 kids. Years later, I learned that your second year studying anything, you are called a sophomore, because it's your second year studying something and you think you know it all. You've studied a little bit, and a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Sophomoric means callow and immature. Sophisticated means adulterated and impure. Originally applied to artificial gemstones, because you took clear glass, or the mixture for clear glass, and you adulterated it with impurities that stained the mixture. And then you could wait for it to cool and cut it up and sell it as emeralds and sapphires and rubies and all sorts of shit that it wasn't. Adulterated and impure, that's what sophisticated means. Callow and immature. So, as we become less violent, further away from our founding fathers back in the days when the sheep and potato brigade first came here and turned a productive food forest into this by application of European land management techniques. And when they came here, they brought the verbiage of combat. They were battling with the environment. They were wresting a living from nature. They had the idea that the creator God theory of the universe that created the biosphere over time knew nothing. It had to be man aged. Men had to play with it and make it grow old before its time. And it was done by the British, the brutish, the people who'd been conquered by the Romans, they'd been raided by the Vikings. They had this overcompensated inferiority complex where the theory was you have to be nastier than anybody else in order to get ahead. You got to compete. And, they were the end product of 12,000 years or 11,000 years of harvest everythingism that had come out of Göbekli Tepe at the end of the last ice age. So it's difficult to personally blame the British for behaving like the brutish because they were part of the great British Empire. Clive of India was a particularly nasty bastard. Maybe we could make an exception about him. And anyway, the people who started Australia were either financed by people from England who wanted to come out here in search of land, looking for their fortune, like MacArthur or somebody. Come out here, grow European foodstuffs, fibres, get convicts from the government to work your land, clear the land, sow it, harvest it. Ideally, they wanted to produce something here they could send back to Europe. They finished up sending timber back initially. But anyway, everybody was brutalised. The British used to think it was absolutely normal to sentence somebody to 100 lashes with a cat o' nine tails. So each hit gave you 9 smacks. And to make the cat o' nine tails work better, they put chunks of lead at the end of the 9 strands. When you hear a British Imperial talk about some building as being so small you couldn't swing a cat, they don't mean getting your pussy cat and whirling it around by the tail. They mean getting a cat of 9 tails and swinging it at somebody who's tied up to bent over a chair or something. That's what swinging a cat means to an Englishman. Everybody was brutalised. The people who come out of the British convict system, as far as they were concerned, a sucking chest wound is nature's way of telling you to slow down. They were permanently angry. They suffered from PTSD, and if anybody annoyed them, they smacked them, they belted them, they hit them, they beat them. And their children grew up watching that and thinking it was normal. And if you study a bit of child psychology and infant development, you discover that for the first 3.5 years, the kids will suck up absolutely anything. It's just input, 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 data input, gathering, 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 data input, role model, role model, role model. Whatever the little boys see the men who are particularly their loving carer, but what they see the adult men doing in their micro environment, that sets the normal mark on their dials and gauges inside their head, inside their emotions, inside their subconscious. That's going to be what they default back to, whatever they saw their father doing and however they saw him behaving, however they saw him reacting. I heard it in a textbook, heard it in a lecture, didn't really believe it until I found myself devolving to my father, red in the face and bellowing with rage at various times when my marriage was turning to turds. But a couple of times I did see him worked up like that when I wasn't doing what he wanted me to. Never saw him talk to me mum like that. Never saw that. But I was aware that there were other people in society who did beat each other up. Parents who beat each other. I didn't know much about it at the time, but later on I found that a lot of my wife's friends were in second, third or fourth subsequent relationships, and a lot of them had very, very similar stories to tell. And when I was talking to the blokes that they were with, a lot of them had very, very similar stories to tell. And this is sort of ancient nursing education crisscrossed with anecdotal observation and correlated by memory. But from what I can see, the little girls who grow up watching mummy getting beaten senseless on the weekend because daddy's drunk, because he's pissed off having to work at a shit job that he doesn't want to do, because all he wanted was a cuddle and hopefully maybe a hand job, and that grew into getting fucked, and then his missus was pregnant. And once upon a time, that meant that you pretty much had to get married unless you were going to become a cad and a bounder and piss off and join the Navy, or, you know, go into state or something, and leave the woman to deal with it, which it could mean a backyard abortion. It could mean putting the baby up for adoption. It could mean going and shagging someone straight after the first period was late and trying to blame him for it. All kinds of things happen, but a lot of people quote the figure that roughly 25% of people, when they started checking DNA, the person on their birth certificate as their father was not related to them. Now, there's an awful lot of, quote, free play going on in society. But anyway, there's this nature-nurture thing going on. People are not only what they are genetically line-bred to do, you know, this is what your ancestors were good at, therefore you are going to be genetically selected to be good at that, because anybody who was good at something else that didn't work, they died. There's epigenetics, so you can have apparently a more or less infinite variety of options and different conditions in your environment, in your starting conditions, depending on whether you get beaten around the kitchen all the time, or whether it's just randomly, or whether you always get treated well and have everything explained to you in a bright, stimulating, happy, learning-oriented environment. You can get the same kid with the same potential intelligence quotient and the same potential to exceed as a genius doing great things for the world, and you can turn them into Isaac Newton or Christopher Wren or Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin, depending on how you parent the little potential genius, potential axe murderer. If you get what they call an orchid child, they only grow in really good soil with perfect watering and perfect temperature control, and somebody being really, you know, nice to them. If you've got a dandelion child, you can throw that seed on sand, and if there's vaguely enough water and vaguely enough wind, enough sun with not too much wind, it'll grow a flower, and the flower will produce seed. It won't be as good as the orchid, but it'll be a flower. Some kids are like that. They're never going to be a super genius, but they can grow up functional despite mediocre parenting, even some bad parenting. And there are some people who grow up in shitty domestic suburban situations, or out on farms, or in well-heeled, wealthy situations where one parent's super busy trying to make the money come in and the other parent's busy drinking the sherry collection in the McMansion because they don't like being in the relationship. But there used to be little in the way of divorce back then. Like, I can literally remember the only one of my classmates whose parents split up because that kid's mother wanted to go off and set up house with somebody else's father. And pretty much as soon as that happened, both families left town. You know, nobody wanted that. To get a divorce, you had to prove the other person had done the wrong thing. And a lot of people who couldn't stand each other stayed together in horrible marriages. And there are a lot of people who've had really bad role modeling, and they've had not much actual nurturing and parenting, because, you know, like, once the First World War began to require women going into the factories in order to run the industrial economy, while the men went out and sat in a hole in the ground and, you know, threw explosives at each other for 4 years. Then it was kind of grandparents who were looking after the kids in their toddlerhood before they went to school. And once upon a time, the theory is that mum and dad go out and do the mum and dad things and make the house function economically, nutritionally, provisionally, cleaning the whole place and whatever, mowing the lawn, putting the garbage out, if you will, going to work in the fields or the factories, whatever it is, but they shared the responsibility of making the household function. And grandparents, unmarried uncles and aunts, sisters, brothers, whatever, they all sort of shared childcare and supervision. And if somebody's grandmother was dementing, she was happy to tell the same story over and over and over again, and the kid was happy to hear the family history over and over and over again. And the stuff that you cling on to when you're dementing is the earlier parts of your life. So the old-fashioned three-generational, multi-generational family, it was pretty good for childcare and teaching the kids how to live their life, as long as you didn't move around so much that you couldn't introduce your kids to their grandparents. You know, like my half-siblings didn't like my mother, so therefore they all went away, and their children had bugger all to do with my father, because he was busy playing second family, see? And I turned up as the spoiled brat of the family odd couple, the town's odd couple, family odd couple too, I suppose. But anyway, personally, yeah, I can remember believing that any time you wanted to raise your voice to a girlfriend, that was the time to get out of the relationship, because if you got past the idea of trying to shout because they weren't paying attention, you were at risk of wanting to try and punch the information in, thinking they were a computer. And it wasn't until I got married to somebody who was, you know, older than me and claimed to be much more wise in the ways of the world, that it was explained to me that I was actually, you know, emotionally retarded in thinking that I couldn't vent my anger and rage. And you know, I basically was told I should throw shoes against the wall or smash a plate or something to work the rage out. And I can remember another time when, on medical advice not to leave somebody unsupervised while they were in a particularly cranky phase, yeah, they were hitting me with sticks. And I can remember about the third time I let go of them and sort of looked aside and go, they actually succeeded in hitting me in the head. And I can remember seeing a punch being launched by, you know, a thing called my fist. And, oh, shit, that's interesting. Oh, it's in slow motion. This must be really fucking serious. I've gone into time dilation. And then out of the other eyeball, oh, Christ, it's aimed at that nose. So I tried very hard, best I could, to turn that into that, and all I succeeded in doing was turning that into that. So yeah, I busted the extensor tendon on that finger. Had to have reconstructive surgery because I was trying very hard not to land the blow that I had launched in blind fucking reaction uncommanded. It can't possibly have been a reflex because we don't have such reflexes, but it was an uncommanded response. It was a coordinated muscular action that I had no ability to stop it from happening, or stop it from launching. I was able to stop it landing, but yeah, the violence of the blow delivered was such that it popped the end of my hand open, and of course it broke the nose. And for those of you who like to claim that they're holier than thou and they wouldn't ever get involved in any kind of domestic violence, it was a bloody big surprise to me. And at least as surprising as the fact that that's what happened was the very first thing the other person said. What they said was, "You hit me. See, I told you you were violent. Oh my God, you've broken my doze." I couldn't say nose because, yeah. So I know what it's like to have somebody set themselves to prove themselves correct in their observation that, oh, there's an angry person under the surface lying in wait inside of you. Oh, I don't know, I'm pretty fucking cool and calm, you know, got myself sorted. Oh, no, you're violent, you're violent. One of the means of sort of emotional control that you don't hear much about is somebody who is so convinced that all men are violent that whenever a man walks past them, they flinch. So that's pretty difficult to reconcile with somebody who tells you that they love you and they want to be with you all the time, but they flinch every time you walk past them. You know, it's like, well, what the hell's going on in their head? But anyway, one of the things that I was told by a policeman who was in the process of paperworking me was that 85% of the call-outs for domestic violence that they attended, the woman had actually struck the first blow. However, the man had been vastly more successful in causing injuries which generated both hospital treatment and paperwork. So I really don't know, like when I was a kid, there was like 10.5 million Australians. There was 11 million Australians when I started going to school. 11.5 million when I popped out of school. There's now 28 million. I was having Friday night feed with some friends of mine, and I mentioned that I'd scratched my head and I could think of an awful lot of suicides. People had hung themselves and shot themselves. There were a few accidental shootings and stuff like that. But I could really only think of one man in the 2370 postcode who murdered his ex-partner, and in fact it was his wife. I don't think they'd actually gone through any paperwork to divorce or anything, but he lived in that house out there I pointed out in one of my videos on a motorbike ride, and she left, and she kept coming back and coming back and coming back and stirring the pot and all the rest of it, and there was a religious schism between one of them being Catholic and the other one not being Catholic, and he told her, don't come back. You come back out here and I'll bloody well shoot you. I've had you. Can't stand looking at you. Don't want to listen to you. And yeah, she was going to prove that he was wrong and she was right. So she went out there with, I think it was her brother, and behold, he just walked out of the house and shot her, killed her. That's the only one. I don't know of any others. There might be others that I am too ignorant to know about. Like I know of a bloke who was growing pot on somebody else's property, and he was disguising it by saying that it was, that's a bun tree by the way, 25 years in a shitty environment, hardly grows at all. But anyway, he was pretending to be a sapphire miner, and the bloke who owned the land found the pump and the pipeline and the plants, and they had a conversation, and the bloke who'd put the plants in shot the bloke who owned the land, and he shot him with a 22 rifle, and then he drove to town and got a shotgun and went back and shot him again, killed him. I went to his committal hearing because I was unemployed, and going to court's actually better than watching TV. You can sit in the gallery and you shut your mouth and you can learn something. How the system works for one, what doesn't work for another, what some people will do when they think they're going to get away with something and it doesn't turn out the way they wanted it to. Yeah, there was another time when one person told another person that he could go out and use a red hot tip to go and dig in the middle of a river in land that belonged to somebody else entirely, and on the hypothesis that there should have been 36 mining reserves marked on the map because they were mentioned in the legislation, and there's only 35 marked on the map, so this is where the 36 one should be. So therefore, let's go out there and dig in the river for sapphires. And when the person who'd been told this got somebody else out there, and the first person found their tyre tracks, the tyre track finder went out there after drinking, and he apparently didn't like redheads, and the invited person, without the permission of the bloke who had no rights over the place anyway, he had red hair, so they got into fisticuffs. And the bloke who'd found the tyre tracks swung a punch, got punched, fell into the back of his panel van, came out bearing a pick handle, swung his pick handle in a big, broke the ribs of the redhead, and the redhead then clamped his elbow down on the pick handle and turned around, and he got to own the pick handle. And by that stage, his kill switch had been triggered. And at the committal hearing, the pathologist said he couldn't figure out how many times the tyre track finder had been hit in the head with the pick handle, because the first blow had broken his skull and subsequent blows had pushed the bones fragments out through the skin, because it sort of looked like a plastic bag or a garbage bag with a watermelon in it, hit with a pick handle. And yeah, there were bruises all over him. So yeah, I've been to a committal hearing, And there was another bloke who didn't like his father, and I think he beat him up, and then he shot him, and then he dragged him behind his car, and then he hanged him from a bridge, and then he cut him down and covered him over with water-rounded rocks. But there's only one case I can think of around here. Oh, there was another one where a bloke drove his car into some absolute random stranger and his son and killed them, and that hit the murder statistics. But yeah, in 63 years, I can think of one breaking up couple where one partner murdered the other one. And I'm not, well, yeah, there is another one where a fella reckoned that his missus fell out of the boat on a local dam, and the people on the side of the dam saw from a distance what looked like him using an oar to push her under the water, and she drowned. And he got away with saying that he was trying to get her to hang onto the oar and pull her into the boat, and nobody was close enough. And on the principle of reasonable doubt, you have to prove beyond reasonable doubt. They couldn't even prove manslaughter. Manslaughter is when you do something not because you're trying to kill somebody, but because you don't care if somebody dies. You're going to do what you're going to do. If you do what you're going to do, recklessly, carelessly, negligently, and someone dies, it can only ever become manslaughter, which I think carries a maximum of 15 years. It can't ever become murder, and murder has the baseline of 25 years to life, because when it's murder, you meant to kill someone. Now, there's a famous case in New South Wales where a policeman had broken up with his wife, and she immediately partnered up with somebody else, and because presumably she'd been programmed when a toddler to be attracted to men with a bit of a smell of violence to them, she found one of them as a new partner, and because the next one's generally worse, the children disclosed to the father that mummy's new boyfriend was molesting them sexually, and daddy was a policeman, and mummy kept saying, oh, he's making it all up, he's making it all up. And I know a bloke who lost custody for 4 years because the missus said to the family court and got the Department of Community Services to put it in a report, oh, my husband uses mind control to program the children with false memories, and that's why they support him in his custody matters. Yeah. The psychiatrist couldn't explain it, but that was like a 1990s version of a Zoom interview where he was talking out of a speaker on the table. But yeah, I know a bloke who lost custody because that's what his wife convinced, or that's what his wife said to the social workers, and the social workers put it in their report, and the judge was too feeble-minded to figure out that was bullshit, because like the CIA doesn't know how to use fucking mind control to get somebody programmed with false memories so that they will give fraudulent evidence to support somebody else's story in court. Like, if you're going to lie in court, you're lying in court. Look at a fella called Trumpy. And it's not working out for him. It's not working out for him. So, anyway, mummy huffed and puffed and said that daddy, the policeman, was obviously trying to game the system, so she gamed the system, is my impression. And when it came to the absolute last gasp on the courthouse steps after mummy had won, the judge had been bullshitted to, the social workers had supported the mother, because any time a woman says, oh, he's violent, you must believe the woman. You should never ever question her in case you re-traumatise her. You should never cross-examine any evidence given by a woman against any man, because women are the protected species. Let's face it, within our society, women are the protected species. That's why women and children first in the lifeboats. Like, it's not stupid. It's a pro-survival trait. I fully agree with it. But when it comes to court, we have this system where if you want to complain about somebody having done something wrong, the policeman's job is not to punish the wrongdoer. The policeman's job is to bring the defendant to the court for the court to listen to the evidence. And when the evidence has been tried, then the court decides on matters of guilt, and the court decides on matters of sentencing. And if you think that you should be able to wander into the police station and say, boo-hoo, sob, sob, he hit me, or the alternate version, boo-hoo, sob, sob, I've been raped, without being questioned further, without making a statement, without swearing the statement, without attending mention hearings, and without giving evidence in court, and without having your story questioned either by the person whom you are accusing. And no, you can't accuse anybody anonymously, because part of democracy and part of the Magna Carta is that habeas corpus, and you'll have your day in court, and you will be able to see and know who is accusing you and what the evidence is that's being held, judged against you, or thrown at you. So I'm increasingly despairing of the news coming out of the radio of, like the number of people being killed in shithouse relationships is keeping pace with the growth of the population. So therefore we have to suddenly change the way the law works so that women are the protected species because men are assholes. And some women believe that because they grew up watching their father beat their mother. They imprinted on that sort of a man. Now, the way pheromones work, women are attracted by the smell of the pheromones of any man who has a different immune system to their own. It leads to hybrid vigor of the fetus. You get really easy, get pregnant easily, you have a dream pregnancy, you have an easy birth, and the kid grows like a weed, right? Once a woman's 3 months pregnant, her nose changes polarity, and the bloke who got her pregnant smells like a pig, so she doesn't want to fuck him and disturb the baby and have a miscarriage, and then he starts to smell yummy again when she's no longer pregnant. It's a really good system. However, if you put a hormonal contraceptive into the woman and you make her nose pregnant before she's actually got a baby in the uterus, it buggers everything, because she's then going to go around and find men that she's genetically designed to breed badly with, and they're going to be yummy. Eat the pill, and then when they finally go off the pill and they try to get married and settle down to have a kid, the rule of thumb is the number of years they were living together before they get married is the number of months they last before they break up. And if they grit their little teeth and keep on going, they might have several miscarriages or have to go on the IVF program in order to have the miscarriages. And then they'll have an obstructed, complicated birth, and she'll come home with bloody postnatal depression. And it's, what have you done? You started out by making your nose pregnant so you could fuck a bunch of strangers for the fun of it before you decided to use your reproductive system to reproduce. There's all these people who are just like me as a teenager. He thought his hair in his pants was, just to enjoy. He chased the girls, he tried quite hard, he was not very coy. At every dance, he chased their pants, the lust-filled teenage boy. Yeah, we grew up in the 70s thinking that pregnancy was an unintended consequence of something that was fun to do. We never went looking to shag people with the idea of, one day we might, be able to afford to get married. That wasn't a thing. But anyway, little girls, they find somebody who smells different to their father, but he otherwise reminds her of him. That's yummy. Little boys, they find somebody who smells different from mummy, right? But she's ovulating. Little boys grow into men, and men are attracted by the pheromones of any ovulating woman. And if he doesn't know that that's a fact, he can find himself being mysteriously compelled to go and start an affair in a broom closet with somebody that he just doesn't have any intentions or ability to set up house with, if that broom closet relationship should happen to conceive somebody. So then you start getting into all sorts of arguments over family planning and right to life and freedom of choice. And we are all currently locked into the downstream consequences of previously made decisions and choices from time immemorial. We can't eat a dodo. We can't look at a dodo because a Dutchman 400 years ago ate the last one. They were on a mercenary piratical expedition to steal the Spice Islands and kill anybody who disagreed. And on the way, they ate the last dodo. They had free will, including freedom to pick wrong. Dodos tasted like shit. They were tough, they were stringy, they were bland, they were oily, but they were easy to catch. And Dutchmen were tight-fisted. That's why they were going to steal the Spice Islands, so that they could bring back all the spice and charge as much as they wanted, because nobody could compete with them on price. Yeah? Ah, the Europeans. Look at the bloody shit and misery they've unleashed upon the earth. And when you look at society today and people poke fingers at certain segments of society, oh, look at them, you know, they're doing this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah. Well, half of the stuff that some ethnocentric out-group is accused of doing turns out to be bullshit, you know, like Johnny Howard put the bloody army into the Northern Territory to make war against Aboriginal society on the strength of a fucking anecdotal rumour that was never, ever even taken to court, asserting, alleging, pretending that teenage Aboriginal girls were being prostituted to truck drivers on the highway between Adelaide and Darwin. Never happened, but it didn't stop the politicians from winning elections on it. Our society has been founded on violence. The society we have today, and the people who employed the violence to steal this land, to denude it of its people, to dispossess them, to act like true little colonists and empty their bloody colon all over everything they failed to understand at first glance. They were a violent people. They've bred a violent tribe of descendants. And whereas once upon a time Granny was living in the house and she'd dandle a little infant on her knee and the kid would grow up, having gone through the process where every minute of wakefulness for the first 3.5 years, when 25 to 35 times an hour a healthy human infant, baby, toddler, will whimper, make some sort of a noise and look at their regular loving carer and expect the regular loving carer to have A, heard the noise, B, turn around and check on them, and C, lock eyes and say something reassuring. It's okay, darling. Yes, yes, you're doing well. Oh, is that what you're up to? 35 times an hour. Chimpanzees, 25 times an hour, they look to the alpha female, the queen of the family, the boss, matriarch. It's a primate thing. If the kid has been propped up on a pillow with a bottle on the pillow looking at Sesame Street or Play School or Bill and Ben the Flower Pot Men or Mr. Ed, the kid doesn't, well, Mr. Squiggle, the kid whimpers and the lady on TV doesn't look back, doesn't say anything encouraging. The kid doesn't get a reassurance that they matter, that somebody's watching them, that somebody cares about them, that somebody loves them, that somebody is looking after them. They don't get that 35 times an hour in the first 3.5 years. And they grow up with a gnawing, empty, angry, burning hole in their self-esteem. And when they go to kindergarten, and they're 4 or 5 years old, they show up and they look around and they see some other kid who's got rosy cheeks, neatly done hair, clean uniform, not put on cross-buttoned, hasn't got yesterday's breakfast on the shoulder. And the kid who's got all those indications of rushed parenting, ignorant parenting, uninformed parenting, careless parenting, reckless parenting, negligent parenting, time poor parenting, you know. That kid, he looks around and he sees if anybody's watching, and he goes over to the kid who's happily playing in the sandpit, punches him in the head and pinches his bloody spade and runs away with it to use it as a gun while playing cowboys and itchy bums. Now, that's not something that I made up. It's two separate stories put together, things that I've seen. People often ask me how I speak authoritatively about shit that happened back in the 1960s. There's a condition, a phenomenon, a subspecies, what they call very highly superior autobiographical memory recall. I haven't got that. Thanks be to the creator God theory. The people who've got that can't remember being born, but they can remember going through the swing doors leading out of the labour ward and the other pair at the end of the corridor going into the neonatal intensive care. My first memory, I was 6 weeks old and I've only got pin sharp, flash images. But I can remember a lot of stuff that happened back then and paying attention and trying to figure out why the world was the way I was seeing it, hearing it, listening to it. So basically what seems to be going on is the little boys who think it's normal at some deep subconscious level, no matter what they've been paying lip service to in a couple of hours worth of lectures, they know that men who beat women are evil, and if they can find somebody else who's beaten a woman and defends themselves for having done it, they'll quite happily go and punch his lights out. But then when they're being nagged about something that they said they were going to do and they didn't get around to, and maybe they're half drunk and feeling guilty because they spent the money on a fucking racehorse that ran last, they can become very angry very fast, and what they want is somebody to shut up and stop nagging, and they will act out. They will also be attention seeking and limit testing, just like they never resolved in their personality issues when they were neglected children, not being parented as well as they could have been if the people parenting them had the knowledge and the temperament and the time and the inclination to parent them any better than they were parented. Therefore, thus and because a certain person said 2,000 years ago, and the sins of the parents shall be visited onto the children, even unto the 7th generation. If your great-great-great-grandparents didn't have time to raise their kids, who were too busy to raise their kids, who had to go off and do other things instead of raising their kids, and then television was invented and nobody had any interaction, and then their parents moved 7 times every generation chasing a job, is it any wonder that what's coming out of the pipeline of teenagehood at the moment has no fucking idea how to conduct themselves or to behave, how to be half a relationship? They're terribly self-entitled because people have been fobbing them off with bright, shiny landfill and fairy floss and supersized servings of French fries and KFC and McDonald's and sugar and fat and left-handed fat, so you can eat as much as you want and don't have to get fat, and then you just shit it all out through your underpants every time you fart. We are a long way down a really stupid track. And the women who think it's a situation wherein it doesn't matter which man they pick because all men are violent, because all violent men are men. They decide that all men must be violent. And in their experience, in the circles of the community in which they move, that is their observation. That is their experience. If their father beat their mother and they go out and they hang around while they're on the pill and they find somebody who's really fucking yummy, I don't know what it is, but he's really cool, and she's smoking, so she's got no sense of smell, so that randomises what the oral contraceptives are otherwise called. And he is looking for some woman who grew up watching her mother get beaten around the kitchen. And somehow, subconsciously, those two find each other. And they then go out and have 1.5 to 2.3 children before they break up and get into a Brady Bunch with someone who lives at the opposite end of the street. And then they do it again. And people say half of marriages fail. Well, yeah, sort of, kind of. 25% of first marriages, 50% of second marriages, 75% of third marriages, 100% of fourth marriages. Nobody fucking knows why anybody wants to get married for the 5th or 6th time. Ask Rupert Murdoch. Every time he gets rid of one gold digger, along comes another one, younger. And there's no fool like an old fool. No fool like an old fool. I watched my mother play my father and her boyfriend after that. But yeah, taught me that the way a man expresses his manhood in times of absolute cranky pantsness is to bellow and scream and wave their arms and stuff. And he used to beat me up. So yeah, when somebody provoked me for a couple of years and then finally fucking hit me in the middle of a screaming match after threatening me for a while, yeah, I hit him. Hit him. Didn't mean to hit him. Didn't ever hit him again. Haven't hit anybody else either. There was one bloke who come upon me when I was on my hands and knees after she'd been trying to grab a hold of me and drag me backwards, so I just walked in her direction, and she was wearing high heels on grass, which is not a good recipe for walking backwards. So the heels spiked and dug in, and she fell over, and she was hanging on to me and hanging on to someone, and the other someone was hanging on to me as well, and I didn't want to let go of the someone, and I didn't want to hurt anybody, so I sort of contrived to land on my elbows and my knees and not squash anybody, trying to figure out how to stand up. And this fucking lard ass dingbat who was on about his fourth or fifth de facto relationship because he'd been kicked out by his missus, and rather than get his act together and go and, be someone within beck and call so his kids could, migrate on the school bus or something. Oh shit, no. He left them in Melbourne and he was up in bloody northern New South Wales trying to set up camp with some woman who'd spat the husband out so that he could then demonstrate to his missus that he was so too a really good man to have around the house. Yeah, so he come down and started punching me in the back of the head while I was on my hands and knees. And he got one of them fucking insensate reactions too. I remember being hit on the back of my head, and I remember holding him by his beard, which I'd already lifted up into about the 11 o'clock position. So he was looking at me through this eyeball. This corner of his eyeball was looking at me. And he was saying, I'll let go if you let go. I'll let go if you let go. And I looked down and he was hanging onto my shirt with both hands. And at the time, I was debating the merits of flipping he had a long beard too, of flipping it round and just twisting his neck. And my other hand was drawn back in a very solid looking fist, and it was targeted where behind his eyeball, halfway to his ear, where the middle meningeal artery runs in a little bony groove on the inside table of the skull. If you punch somebody right there, you'll flex the skull, and the inner table is thin, and the bone will crack, and it'll tear that middle meningeal artery. And then they've got about 4 to 6 hours, and they're going to need to have sort of mild brain surgery. They're going to have the scalp pulled back and a drill drain hole bored in their skull to get the blood clot out. Otherwise they'll just slowly go downhill and die. So that's what I was thinking when he says, I'll let go if you let go. Oh, shit. I'm in the middle of a fucking fight. All right, so I let go and went away. When I am not being attacked by surprise when I'm looking the other way, I'm really fucking calm and easy to get along with. And that was like, 30 odd years ago, and 30 years of being a vegetarian hopefully has calmed me down. But I think the best response to our current situation would be to as forcibly re-educate the women who think that it's normal for all men to be violent as we re-educate the men who think it's okay to do what we saw our fathers doing, right? Instead of rationalising and denying and trying to justify bad behaviour because, I was just. How about you admit, I let myself get into a situation where I couldn't handle it and I saw fucking bright red and I fucked up and I hurt someone. That's a good response. And teach your offspring, as my dad taught me. In our family, we have this thing called a big hammer reflex. In about 1926 or so, my grandfather was cutting a screw on a big, thick piece of metal, and everybody had told him the screw cutting machine needs to have a motor put on it, and he was too much of a skinflint and a tight ass. And he said, oh, no, it'll be cool, no worries, So he started at lunchtime to cut a thread on. It's really hard work, turning a big wheel and a reduction gearbox, and he got to the end of it at about 4 o'clock. So he'd spent 3 hours maybe sweating in the afternoon sun, and he went to wind the bloody die off, and it started cutting the thread off the bar because he'd set the die up just a bee's dick wrong, and he'd cut a crooked thread and it wouldn't come off without removing the crooked thread, and he tried to set it up different ways, and then he realised that even if he did succeed and he couldn't figure out how to do that, the crooked thread wouldn't run an ordinary bolt because everything was wrong. And he realised that he'd wasted his entire afternoon, so he went into the next bay, and my father saw him head out to the blacksmith's forge end of the workshop, and he come back carrying the biggest sledgehammer that he owned, and that was called Hammer Tobin because it weighed 18 pounds, and Monsignor Tobin was the biggest, fattest clergyman in town. And my grandfather had a sense of humour when it come to clergymen because his father was a preacher before he became a teacher. So my grandfather goes past my father and he's got Hammer Tobin in his hands, and Dad says, what's up to, boss? And he says, I'm just going to go and make some adjustments. And my dad thinks, well, what sort of adjustments can you make with an 18-pound sledgehammer and a cast iron screw cutting machine? Well, apparently my grandfather started to trot before he got to it, and he wasn't quite at a full gallop when he arrived, but that personal velocity of running across the workshop, that was added to how much velocity he could put into the 18-pound sledge as he swung it with both hands in an arc that landed on the machine, and a bit of the machine come off and landed on the ground. And he wheeled around and he smashed it with the sledgehammer, and those two went out of sight. And then he got into the machine, and my old man got the employees, and in them days there would have been about a dozen of them, and they all went out and stood across the road in the park under the oak tree among the acorns, watching me grandfather with the sledgehammer at the far end of the workshop, swing, clang, swing, clang, swing, clang, swing, clang. And when 5 o'clock come, my father went and closed the door on it and went home. And apparently my grandfather got home at about 10 o'clock and his dinner was cold and burnt in the oven. And the next morning when they went there was no part of the screw cutting machine bigger than that, and the bits were right across everywhere that had a concrete floor. My grandfather had been so pissed off at that machine that he had chased down the bits after he'd smashed the bits, and he smashed the bits to bits. Yep. And then he ordered a brand new screw cutting machine with a motor. And there was never any more drama. But Dad told me that story when I was about 6 or 7 years old, and I'd been trying to make an Airfix model of a Boeing Chinook helicopter. And every time I tried the two sides and the top kept falling over sideways because I'd touch it too soon. And I was going to town with my father's claw hammer. And that's when I got told about the big hammer reflex. I've explained it to my son. I've seen my son's reflex arc to short circuit. He'll be working on something and I can see him getting tenser and tenser and tenser, and then the vein starts pulsing in his forehead, and he backs off and he goes over and he makes a cup of coffee. Is he all right? Yep, just rebuilding patience. Pretty much the only advice I can give anybody who's in a relationship where they get actual constant real-time urges to commit violent acts: breathe deep, walk away, make a cup of coffee, rebuild patience, and remember, you have no right to hit anybody no matter what noise they make with their mouth. It doesn't matter what they say. And if they hit you and hurt you, fucking good. Walk out and go to the doctor and get that wound documented, because if they're going to hit you, it's going to happen again, and the relationship will go down the fucking tube. Because it's really hard to smooch up to somebody and tell them how much you love them after they've been, throwing dishes at you or shoes, or you've been punching them. After that, it's always going to be very fragile, and it's going to be shy, and it's going to be a pretense. Because, and the theory of equal damage means that if you've had 5 bad relationships, you're going to hook up with someone who's equally as damaged. Because neither one of you has the right to go and blight the life of some fucking cleanskin who might be able to have a happy relationship if they don't hook up with some scarred, battle-torn old veteran who's got half a dozen traumatised kids in their past from half a dozen traumatised Brady bunches that didn't bloody work because they didn't prioritise reproduction as a use for their reproductive system. They prioritised partying and living in the moment, and seeing how little effort it took to talk the pants off someone who was easier to talk the pants off. And karma comes to everybody who doesn't pay attention. 23 years after yodeling in the final canyon, the 47th canyon, I got the tonsil cancer from the human papillomavirus, because oral cancers are sexually transmitted diseases. But, it's all part of Australia's domestic violence norms. It is a thoroughly bloody dysfunctional society. The people who came here from England had no idea how to be functional parents, because their ancestors got colonised by the Romans 2,000 years ago, and 3,000 years ago before that by the Yamnayans. The people who are dominant on the face of the earth are the bloody barbarians. We are the barbarians. When Gleagle was shot by Captain Cook, that was when the Aborigines met the first Yamnayan to come out here and claim the place for the Royal Navy. It's not surprising that Australia's got a certain underlying level of violence. What surprises me is that it's not actually worse than the media tells us that it is. And as far as the media is concerned, whatever bleeds leads, and they want something that is exciting and or outrageous to report on, because if it's exciting and outrageous, then the audience will respond with clicking on the bait. It's I don't know. I get a lot of my inspiration for what might be a clever way to raise a kid by watching how the kangaroos do it, and thinking, well, actually, it's not that different to the way the Aborigines used to run their society. Maybe they got their inspiration from watching the wildlife. Don't know about that, but like, no marsupial doe ever raises its first joey past weaning unless that doe has been raised by at least a middle-aged, accomplished mother who's already raised 2 joeys to the point of being independent. The only time I've ever seen a doe raise their first joey to independence is when that doe has got her mother and her, at least in this case, 2 sisters. And one of the sisters has got a joey at foot as well. So you get a functional little family clan structure, and yeah, even a kangaroo can get their first offspring almost to adulthood, to adolescence, in the presence of foxes, in the presence of cats, in the presence of predatory birds, in the presence of shooters, in the presence of roads and cars and headlights. Yeah, it takes a lot of experience for a kangaroo to raise its offspring. It takes a lot of knowledge to parent. Way back in 1997, I read in New Scientist magazine of research done jointly by Edinburgh University and Stockholm University, where they got one cohort had one 1-hour lecture on sex education, in scare quotes, once before becoming old enough to leave school at the end of year 10. That's it. The other cohort, they got 1 hour of formal lectures on human reproduction from kindergarten to the end of year 12. So they left with about 500 hours of formal study on human reproduction, and they got more than just, which bit goes in what bit. They also got urology and gynecology and obstetrics, dietetics, maternal and infant nutrition, family economics, budgeting for a family, cooking on a budget, family nutrition, first aid, child and infant development, psychology, psychiatry, economic theory, commerce, everything that is useful to know, budgeting, while starting out with a romantic delusion as a young adult or a teenager and finishing up going to your offspring's 21st birthday party. Everything you kind of need to know in order to be able to pull that off with some grace without fucking it up too badly. That's what they gave them in their 500 hours. And then they started this in 1965, mind you. In 1995, that's when they actually drew a line under it and started cracking the crunching the numbers and having a look and seeing what the life outcomes were for the two different age cohorts. What they discovered was that the children who had all that education in human reproduction, part 1, line 1, they had a lower incidence or rate of childhood sexual assault and childhood physical assault from their families or anybody else because they knew what their rights were and they wouldn't put up with it. They wouldn't go, oh yes, oh I'm too scared, oh you say you're allowed to do that. No, no, no. No, you can't do that to me. That's not right. I'm going to disclose. I'm going to tell. So they had a lower rate of being abused. They had a higher age at first sexual encounter. They had a lower number of partners before settling into a permanent relationship. They had a lower rate of relationship breakdown. They had a higher age at first pregnancy. They had a lower rate of unwanted pregnancies. They had a lower rate of abortions. They had a lower rate of adoptions. They had a lower rate of arrests, of being processed by the courts, of being convicted and of being jailed. They had a lower rate of cancer. They had a lower rate of heart disease. They had a lower rate of being declared bankrupt. They had a lower rate of marriage breakdown and a lower rate of divorce. By every measurable life outcome criterion, if you want to handicap your children, tell them nothing about human reproduction. Just don't tell them anything about it. Oh, you can't learn anything about that at school. That's for your mother and father to teach you about. You know, they quite often, mummy and daddy don't know. You know, they figured it out as they went along and, oh, look, this is what happened. Do you have any idea how many people are born deliberately as a result of mummy and daddy saying, oh, I say, let's go upstairs and conceive Archibald or Griswelda? No, that's not what happened. People who are in a relationship figured that this is pretty good and one day we might settle down and have kids and holy fuck, the period didn't show up. How are we going to, you know, like retrospectively bootstrap into a situation where we can deal with this? And depending on how their family responds, they'll get more or less success coming out of it. But it hasn't always been the way it is now. When I was a kid, there was no single parent's pension. When I was a kid, there was no fault divorce. When I was a kid, there was no contraceptive pill in the early days, and there was no abortion on request in the early days. You know, making a mess of your choices and decisions entered into with your reproductive system, it was a really big fuck up. You know, like you could set yourself up for a lifetime of happiness, or you could set yourself up for a lifetime of misery. And there has been a persistent cohort within our community who feels that just because you fucked up should not mean that you fucked up, and therefore you should sit on your hands and try not to fuck up again because you've got no right to make children miserable by your predicted future fuck-ups. Oh, shit, no. There's plenty more fish in the sea. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bad marriages behind. Why not just go and try again? Oh, there's whole fucking industries devoted to counselling people how to start again. Just listen to the Gay BC, which once upon a time used to reflect the makeup of Australian society, but John Howard and Tony Abbott between them decided that the way to extract rural and regional Australia from being loyal to the ABC would be to change the ABC's Charter of Employment from employing a representative proportion of Australians. So, okay, you might expect maybe 1 in 12 people at the ABC to be same-sex attracted. Oh, no. What we've got to do is we've got to have an Aboriginal lesbian, and we've got to have an Asian migrant lesbian, and we've got to have a Lebanese homosexual, and we've got to have a Taiwanese transsexual, and we've got to have basically one of every possible imaginable minority. And then when one of those minorities is having their designated week or day, if it's Gay Awareness Day, well, every one of the producers and every one of the presenters and every one of the fact finders, they're allowed to go off down their own personal predilection and pursue that and make programs about it and broadcast it. And because the funding was cut to the point where everything gets rebroadcast at least 3 times, you can find yourself listening to 20 or 30 hours of repetitive proselytizing, trying to tell me how marvellous my life could be if only I was same-sex attracted, or if only I'd get my dick cut off and go and have an artificial vagina created by a plastic surgeon, or have some fucking estrogen injections and grow myself some tits. You know, that if I would do that, I would be interesting to the people who work at the gay BC. And it's, okay, it's worked. It's worked. Do you know how many normal straight farmers in Australia are interested in looking at the ABC these days, other than the news and the weather and perhaps the sport? But the sport spends a lot of time worrying about who's AC, who's DC, and what plugs into which. And there's an entire age cohorts who have grown up thinking that what matters is which variety of slippery friction of what mucous membranes they get turned on the most by. And everything else has got to be second to that. You're not allowed to talk to somebody about the weather or anything else. You've got to know what pronouns they prefer. He, she, it, and you can't call them shit, no matter how confusing it is. And now they want to change the entire legal system so that no woman can ever be challenged on anything she wants to complain about. As if arseholes didn't already get their just desserts. Everybody seems to expect life is a law and order program or a Rumple of the Bailey program. You know, where at the end of the 27th minute, the guilty person gets convicted and sent to jail. The cop catches the person who did the incredibly interesting, fascinating murder. Don't know why society wants to fixate itself on murder so bloody much, because we don't get that fucking many of them. The way I got onto this whole thing, I said at a Friday night feed that, you know, somebody once did the experiment where they gave people a survey and they said, what is closest to the truth? In Australia every year, there are 30 murders, 300 murders, 3,000 murders, or 30,000 murders. And 40% of the population said there were 30,000 murders. 50% said there was 3,000 murders. Nobody said there was 30 murders a year and that was the closest to actual fact. But at that time, in Australia, like 20, 30 years ago, yeah, there were less than 50 murders a year, or maybe, yeah, there wasn't one murder a year. You know, case where the police charge somebody with murder and convict them with murder, we weren't generating one of them a week. So 30 was the correct answer. But if you look at the television news, the radio news, the internet news, the entertainment, the video games, the movies, the soap operas, the documentaries, the series, it's all fucking violence, murder, selfishness, greed, manipulation, jealousy, envy, you know, like the 7 deadly sins writ large. That's what capitalism runs on. And now you want to fuck with the bloody jurisprudence system. You want to get rid of the presumption of innocence. You want to get rid of bail. You want to get rid of the idea that your evidence is going to be tested in court. You don't get to walk up there and tell the policeman, oh, he hit me, he's a man, put him in jail. No, no way. And I believe it is the inexorable backlash against the people who've been pushing that agenda, which led a bunch of fucking idiots to think that they should bankroll Bruce Lehrman, who, as the judge said, he escaped from the lion's den. He was being tried for rape in the office after hours when he was drunk, and a juror fucked up, so they cancelled the trial, and then the complainant was such a Fruit Loop that the prosecutor didn't dare put her through another proceedings. So the case against him for rape, which he may or may not have been convicted of, went away, and the fucking idiot went back for his hat. He went in there and tried to sue the people who reported on the rape trial for defamation. And the people who reported on the rape trial, God knows why, but they convinced the lady who was raped to get up at the press club and basically commit contempt of court because the matter was already sub judice, and she really polluted and poisoned the jury pool with what she had to say. And apparently the TV was actually, the journalists were going after the Liberal minister who they reckoned had corruptly switched off the Australian Federal Police investigation. But yeah, there's all these people who think the sun, moon and stars shines out of the importance of who they get their rocks off with. And when they're doing it, virtually none of them are thinking about how well they would go raising children with the people they're fucking. I eventually woke up to myself, it was the very idea of every lunge thinking, fuck, I hope we don't get pregnant. Fuck, I hope we don't get pregnant. Fuck, I hope we don't get pregnant. I wouldn't want my kids to have a mother like this fucking bitch. If that's what you're thinking in the backtrack of your head when you're going through the motions, you'd be better off breaking up, going away, living somewhere else, and imagining that you've got a partner that you actually like, that likes you for genuine reasons, that you would like to have, sexual relations with. Because a good shit is better than a bad fuck. And if you're in a fucking horrible relationship where you're constantly fighting and yelling and screaming and trying to stop yourself from punching your partner, your kids haven't got a home. They've got a shit fight. So split up. Set up separate households. Let the kids migrate. And don't fucking inflict a step-parent fantasy onto them. Yeah, it's going to be hard. It's 3 times harder to be a single parent than it is to be half of a couple. But, sorry, you fucked up your breeding. So therefore, it's going to be harder to make your kids grow up to not be fuckwits. It's really easy to raise kids to be fuckwits. All you have to do is beat them at random, don't tell them anything, and not live up to any of their expectations. I've seen fucking hundreds of people do it. And I've seen their kids doing it to their kids, doing it to their kids, because the sins of the parents are visited onto the 7th generation. It's visited onto the children, even under the 7th generation. So, yeah. Now, I'm sorry I've gone on for a long time, but I did go through that whole domestic violence thing. And I, between growing up being horsewhipped and, terrorised by my father and school teachers and other assorted bullies at large, I had 3 years of nursing training. So I knew intellectually all the things that were wrong with giving way to the big hammer reflex and trying to punch information into somebody who didn't seem to be listening or elevating the volume. And if it wasn't for the fact that, I fell in love with a mad woman's cover story. I courted a mad woman's cover story. I married the fucking mad woman's cover story. And then the stress and strain of keeping the cover story up and running grew too much, and she went into a home for the bewildered. And what came out of the home for the bewildered a fortnight later was nothing like what I thought I had married. But in sickness and in health. So I'm still married to the fucking mad woman's cover story, but I keep it 100 miles away and I never talk to it. It never talks to me. One of our kids talks to their mother, but I don't. The other kid doesn't. And all I can say is if you make a fucking mess of your marriage, it doesn't matter how miserable you like to think you are, your kids are going to pay half the price and it goes on forever. And if you make a real bad job of training them, your kids, how to raise kids, how to look after kids, your grandkids will grow up fucking hopeless and their kids and their grandkids will grow up fucking hopeless because the Industrial Revolution has disconnected European civilization from its own child raising process. There is no interconnectivity between the generations because whereas the Aborigines used to live within their Tauri, if you wanted to move to a new Tauri, okay, you can talk it over and go. And after 7 generations, your children will be full members of the tribe that you moved into because that's how long it takes. Eating all the food that grows on that land, drinking all the water that falls on that land until every part of your body, your DNA, is made up of the land you're walking on and you resonate with the landscape. 7 generations it takes to move somewhere else. You want to cross someone else's land, you've got to learn their language. Their language is a description of their lifestyle. So you have to learn their country and learn their lifestyle and learn their language, and then you're allowed to walk off into the next area and you've got to learn their language too. So there were people who could cross 6 or 8 countries, but they had 6 or 8 languages and 6 or 8 lifestyles, and they didn't make a mess anywhere they went. The Broadacre death cult of Harvest Everything, which took over the world, 7 times every generation, they move because their horses have eaten the pasture and they've got nothing to fucking feed the beasts and they have to go and steal somebody else's grazing. 7 times every generation, a European moves chasing money, wealth, possessions, power, land. Anyway, that's the Observer's Guide to Australian domestic violence norms. We are what we are because we colonised this land at gunpoint because our ancestors were fucking unemployable and they were plundering and robbing the landed gentry in England. So they locked them up, put them on a prison hulk and then shipped them to Australia. Here we are. My earliest white ancestor came here in 1850. They were still shipping convicts here, but he was running away from the potato famine. He must have had some money because he set himself up as a carrier and he made his money carting shit to the goldfields and selling it to the whiners. Other white ancestor came out here in 1879 as a preacher. And before that, he was a blacksmith. His son was a blacksmith, my grandfather. So, yeah, that's domestic violence. It's fucking bred into us. And it wasn't bred into the Aborigines. They had real strict codes of justice as to what happened to wife beaters, and some blokes were into it and some blokes weren't, as far as I know. What happened to them was alcohol brought by the white fellas. That's why it was illegal until 1967. As my father said before the referendum, the only thing keeping the Aboriginal culture alive and together is because they can't buy alcohol. The referendum made them full citizens, so they had to be paid full wages, so therefore they all became unemployed. The people who'd stolen their land, who were letting them live there, letting them work for flour and tea and meat and sugar and salt and blankets every year, they said, that's it, I'm not paying your white fellas wages, piss off. And they all got cut off from their homeland and they went to town and they were given the dole. And the bottle shop was allowed to take their dole and swap it for sherry. So yeah, there's a lot of drunken violence among the survivors of that. And who's worse? The people who taught today's generation to be violent, dysfunctional fuck-ups, or the violent, dysfunctional fuck-ups who can't get out of their own bloody way and stop being dickheads? Or the whining fucking bitches who think they can flash their fork at any bloke and get him to bar up and do what they want in the short term and then treat him like shit and wonder why he gets cranky with them. I mean, I don't know how to stop it, how to turn it around. The best I could do was raise my kids not to be fuckwits, and that's worked out pretty good. It's worked out pretty good. Be nice if one of them had a kid, you know. On the other hand, do I really want to try and explain to a child what my generation and their parents' generation has done to the world the kid's got to try and live in? You know, it's a cop out, but yeah, it's almost a relief to have no grandchildren because neither one of my kids has gone broody yet. And I'm not stupid enough to try and take up with the sort of woman who thinks that a man who lives in a lawn locker is a step up. Right? That means that the only woman who could be interested in a dickhead like me is a bag lady with a stolen shopping trolley. I don't want one of them. I don't ever want to get back into a relationship which might turn violent. And all the good ones are already taken. The only ones that are on the market are the ones who've outlived their previous partner, they've never had a partner, or they've got a proven track record of picking partners that they can't fucking stand to live with. That's what's on the market when you're my age. So if you want to have a happy life, don't get into the dating game. Warble's on a lot of YouTube. And don't beat anybody up because you're having a temper tantrum either. There's sovereign words from the fool on the hill. And I am the fool, and it is a hill, and I do live here. Warble's on a lot of YouTube. Ciao.